Today I want to talk about whether or not God has abandoned his covenants with his chosen people. Yes. My inspiration for this came from two sources. First was a film I saw on the BBC called God on Trial. And that's based on a book written by Eli Wiesel, who wrote Night and many other books dealing with the Holocaust. And Eli Wiesel passed away about 2 weeks ago. He was a Holocaust survivor. And so after seeing God on Trial, I found the book and I bought the book, thinking that the book was going to essentially mirror what happened in God on Trial. Well, it's not. They're two completely different stories. The theme is still the same, but the settings are different. The setting in the trial of God takes place in 1649 in Europe, when there were what's called pogroms, P-O-G-R-O-M. Pogroms were purges. They were times when whole communities, whole Jewish communities would be wiped out. They'd be evicted and be killed, much like what followed with the Holocaust later on. But what takes place in the trial of God is a group of Jewish entertainers are in a bar. And they're passing through. And they end up actually having a trial. They end up actually just trying to decide whether in light of everything that is happening then, whether or not God has actually abandoned the Jews. And it turns out at the end, the person who's presiding over this trial is actually Satan, who orchestrates everything that happens during the trial to get the end he wants. So that's really good. And then when I watched this, and I watched this again just recently over the past couple of days, this takes place in Auschwitz. And story has it, and I don't know if it's true or not, but story has it that a group of Jewish prisoners actually did put God on trial. And so this follows the way it's believed that would have gone. And Eli Wiesel may have had direct knowledge of that, he may not have. But the arguments that are made here are compelling. They are truly compelling, and I want to talk about that. So that's where this comes from. And so at times, I'm going to appear to take both sides of the argument. And you may find that as you follow along that your head may start to hurt a little bit. So I apologize in advance for that. And before I tell you how the trial turns out, let's talk about covenants anyway. What is a covenant? Well, a covenant is kind of like a contract. A covenant is a promise, and it may or may not involve promises on both sides. There are what's known as unilateral contracts, unilateral covenants, which is a promise by one person. It says, I'm going to do this. I promise I'm going to do this, and that's it. And there are also conditional covenants and unconditional covenants. A conditional covenant says that if you will, then I will. Or if you do something, then I'll do something. But this also means that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, then I'm going to do something else. So, two of the covenants found in the Bible could be characterized as conditional covenants. There's the covenant of Eden, also called the Edenic covenant. And there's the covenant with Moses, which is the Mosaic covenant. And many scholars characterize both of those covenants as conditional covenants. And they say those are the only ones. That all of the rest of the covenants in the Bible are unconditional. An unconditional covenant is like a promise with no strings attached. It's just the way it's going to be. And our responses to conditional covenants either bring about blessings or curses. So some scholars identify 8 covenants. Some identify 5, some say there are 6, and if you look on Wikipedia, they will identify 17. So I'm going to talk about 8. The first one to talk about is generally recognized as the first one, and that's the Edenic covenant. It's a covenant that's found in Genesis chapter 1, and it's God's covenant actually with Adam. Adam is representing mankind. And Adam stood as the representative, and the covenant is very simple. It's commands of things for Adam to do. There's only one thing that anybody's told not to do. But basically what Adam is told to do is to be fruitful and multiply, to subdue the earth. And the thing to remember here is that prior to Adam, before Adam, Satan had fallen. And there was darkness. And so the earth was dominated by Satan before Adam. So when Adam came into being with this covenant, Adam was in charge of the earth. He was told to subdue the earth. He had dominion over all living things. There was a vegetarian diet then. He was told to maintain the garden. But this wasn't labor, because the earth was going to do whatever Adam told him to do. He had dominion over it. If he said, I want flowers to grow, he didn't have to do much. He didn't have to break a sweat to maintain the garden. The one thing he was told not to do is don't eat anything out of the tree of knowledge. All these other trees, fair game, eat your heart out, but not the tree of knowledge. One thing. We only had to do one thing, and didn't do it. All right. So we know what happened. All right. We violated that covenant. That covenant was conditional. It was broken. It's over. So that's followed by the covenant of Adam, or the Adamic covenant, which really isn't an agreement. It isn't a promise. It pretty much lays out everything God did as a result of breaking that covenant. And the provisions of that is that the serpent was cursed above all animals, because that's the form that Satan took when he enticed Eve to do that, Adam and Eve to do that. So the serpent has to crawl on its belly and eat dust. Also, part of that covenant is that there is a perpetual hatred between Satan and women, which will end when the seed of the woman meets the seed of Satan, when the Antichrist and the Messiah meet and do that battle. Women will have pain in childbirth. Men's labor increases, and that the earth will resist his efforts to control it. And man was not only spiritually dead at that time and separated from God, but now has to endure physical death, except for two exceptions to that covenant: Elijah and Enoch. The only exceptions. This promise, this covenant is still in effect. It's unconditional. There is nothing that we can do to change that. That's just the way it is. The next one is the covenant with Noah. And this is a covenant with all mankind again. Jews are not separated. Jews are not identified. Hebrews are not identified. Those of faith are not identified. This is Noah. And this is an unconditional covenant and is still in effect. And Noah was told to repopulate the earth. But Noah was not told to have dominion. He was not told to subdue it. Because man has fallen, man is on equal footing on this earth with Satan. And the battle is over our souls. The battle is over our hearts. Because if you remember in John talks about the prince of this world. The prince of this world will be cast out. The prince of this world was Satan. And you'll also remember in Luke, and I think in Matthew, after John the Baptist baptizes Yeshua, goes into the wilderness, and Satan approaches him and takes him on high and shows him all the kingdoms in the world. And says that this has been given to me. It was given to him, and he can give it to anyone, and offers it to Yeshua if he will simply worship him instead. So that's important to note, that man was not given dominion over the earth or told to subdue it. He was dominant over animals, who at that point then became to fear man. Man's diet was to consist of everything. It was no longer strictly a vegetarian diet. Man couldn't eat blood. Capital punishment came into being with the Noahic covenant. And God made a promise that the world would never again be destroyed by flood. And as a sign of that covenant, he created the rainbow. That's the sign of his everlasting covenant. So anytime you see a rainbow, you should remember, and I didn't know this, I learned this stuff, okay? I didn't know that the rainbow was that. So a lot of you did. I didn't know that. It's great. Yeah, see? It's good stuff. So now you can tell your children. That's what that means. All right. All right, so this covenant is unconditional, still in effect. The next one is the one with Abraham, which is found in Genesis. Lots of part of Genesis deal with the covenant with Abraham. Chapters 12, 13, 15, 17, and 22. It is an unconditional covenant. And it's a lot of promises to Abraham, but a lot of predictions in this covenant. The nation of Israel will come from him. Abraham is promised the land of Canaan. Abraham's name is to be greatly blessed, and he'll be a blessing to others. The promise is made that those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. Abraham will receive a son through Sarah. His descendants will undergo bondage in Egypt. Nations besides Israel will come from Abraham. And then the sign of this covenant is circumcision on the 8th day. Because up until this time, circumcision was already happening. What set this apart as a sign of this covenant is that it occurs on the 8th day. This is an unconditional covenant. It's still in effect because there aren't any conditions that can end this covenant. Nothing breaches this. Then we move to the Mosaic covenant, and this is very controversial. I looked at lots and lots and lots of research on this, including reading Dr. David Reagan's book. And he talks about the Mosaic covenant. There's lots of scholars that talked about this, and there are lots of scholars, some of them messianic, who say that this covenant has ended, that it's a conditional covenant. There are others who say that there are parts of this covenant that have not yet been fulfilled and it's still in effect. I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole other topic. But the important things to talk about here is that the blessings and curses related to this covenant are found in Deuteronomy. This is the most conditional of all of them. It actually sets the Jewish people apart as God's chosen people. It provides the Torah as the law regarding how people are supposed to worship him and live with one another. It establishes the Sabbath as the sign of this covenant. So we had the rainbow with the covenant with Noah. We have circumcision in the covenant with Abraham. And we have the Sabbath as the sign of obedience to the covenant. And so let me point out that even if you think that when the Messiah rose that ended the covenant, our adherence, our following the rules here has saved us many times. One example is during the Black Plague that happened in Europe. Whole communities were being wiped out. But you know what communities survived? It was Jewish communities that survived because they had different sanitary laws, different dietary laws. They lived their lives differently. They were set apart. And so while some communities were wiped out, it didn't happen with Jewish communities. That's a blessing. But it's also a curse because the other communities said, how come they're not getting wiped out? They must be responsible for all this. Let's get them out of here. If we get them out of here, we'll be fine. So it was a curse. So adherence to the Torah can be a blessing. Can be a curse. So there's also the land covenant that's found in Deuteronomy, which really just reaffirms the title of land belonging to Israel. And the Davidic covenant, which is also very important and is talked about in Samuel. It's also talked about in Psalms 89. God said that of all people we would be his own. I had a covenant with the chosen one, sworn an oath to my servant David. I've made his dynasty firm forever. His throne shall last from age to age. No enemy shall be able to outwit him. No wicked man overcome him. I shall crush his enemies before him and strike his opponents dead. Is that covenant still in effect? Well, if we are his chosen people and we were released from bondage, if we were truly his chosen people, why were we captured again in Babylon? Why did the Babylonians get us? And once we were set free from Babylon, what happened? The Romans had a shot at us and destroyed the temple. We were freed again. The Romans destroyed it. Look at the deaths of Jews at Masada. Look at the purge in Spain in 1492. Look at the pogroms in Russia in the 1600s. Look at the Holocaust. Look at the refusal of the United States in 1939 to let 1,000 Jews who were sitting in a boat outside the coast of Florida come into this country. The U.S. government refused to let Jewish refugees into this country before World War II. We turned them away and they had to go back to Germany. Why does God allow that to happen? If we are His chosen people, why would that happen? It seems to be one Jewish disaster after another. It's what we do. We suffer. It's what's expected of God's people. So you're saying then that the breach is habitual, that we can't expect God to always honor His promises. Well, that can't be right. Because the fact is that Jews continue to exist. The fact that Jews continue to exist and even to thrive is proof that God is keeping His covenant. Think of all the empires that have failed and ceased to exist. The Roman Empire dominated the world. Gone. Greeks, gone. Spartans, gone. Babylonians, gone. Persians, gone. Vikings, gone. Kublai Khan, gone. Spain, Russians, British Empire, gone. All once dominated the known world and are now mere shadows of their former selves. What we endure as Jews before us and as Messianics and Christians today are tests of our faith as individuals first and as a people, as a faith second. We are tested constantly because we live in a physical world. Do we presume that because we have faith and obey His laws that we will never hunger, that we'll never be cold, that we'll never have financial problems, or that nature somehow won't touch us? It's very easy to us to think that when bad things happen, and especially when they happen to other people, that it's all part of God's plan. But that doesn't mean that we're merely puppets being controlled by the masters. We're not programmable robots. We are not. We are human beings because we have free will. And having free will means that we are free to break the covenant. That we are free to turn away. That we're free to ignore. We're free to disobey. And because we have free will, that means that sometimes we are in the receiving end of other people breaking the covenant. It's not God doing it. I said earlier that these bad things are tests. They're tests for those who break the covenant and for those who bear the consequences of other people breaking the covenant. But then where in the covenant does it say anything about tests? It says, you do this, I do that. It says, desert not my laws, but keep my rulings. If you violate my commands, I will punish their offenses with a rod, their guilt with a whip. So perhaps it's not God that's in breach, but us as humans. We turn our back on His teaching. We turn our back on the Torah. We've taken the most simple message of the Word of God, the most simple message, and complicated it. We complicate how we should obey that Word, how we should worship Him. We've made religion into a money-making political machine. Just like it was when Yeshua overturned the money changers' tables and called the Pharisees snakes and vile hypocrites. But wait, what about all the people that observe the Torah? What about the countless religious people who have been martyred, that died in the Crusades for being Jewish, who died in Iraq, who continue to die in Iraq and Syria at the hands of ISIS for being Christian or Jew? What about the students at Columbine who were killed because they would not renounce their faith? What did they do to deserve the penalty for someone else's breach of the covenant? What about the Eastern European Jewish communities who completely followed the Torah, following the festivals, observing the Sabbath? The Torah says that God will punish those who turn away from Him, but why are the good disciplined in order to punish the wicked? The answer to that can be that none of us is completely without sin, that all of us fall short of the glory of God. But then doesn't that make fulfilling the covenant impossible? Are none of us truly innocent? What about children? What crime did the Jewish children commit that warranted the loss of their parents or even their own lives? Shouldn't the punishment be proportional? Now, some would say that Jews are being punished for killing the Messiah. There are many who say that. But those terms weren't part of any covenant. To say that anyone, any religion, is being punished for the death of Yeshua turns the meaning of His death upside down. Wasn't the death of the Messiah? Was the death of the Messiah wrong? Was it something that wasn't supposed to happen? Wasn't it preordained? Wasn't it necessary in order for mankind to be saved? If that's so, then why would anyone be punished for that happening? It doesn't make sense. And if all of us are truly responsible, we should all be responsible. It's not just the Jews. It's not just the Romans. It's not just the Pharisees. It's not just the Sadducees. We all share in that. But it was something that had to happen. It's something that no one could stop. And if Pontius Pilate had decided not to crucify, not to allow that to happen, it was going to happen. It's simply the book would be written differently. It was going to happen at a different time and place. Was God's treatment of the Jews during the Crusades a punishment? Was God's treatment of the Jews during the Holocaust a punishment, or were these purifications? Were these events so horrendous that the world had to become a better place after everything unfolded? Was the flood a purification? I think it was. Was the destruction of the temple a purification? Was bondage in Egypt and bondage by the Babylonians, were those purifications? Each of those events resulted in a faith that was ever stronger and in which the strength of God's people outlasted and overcame the oppressor. If none of those things had happened, if we had never been bound in Egypt, if we had never been bound by the Romans and the Babylonians, if none of those things had ever happened, where would we be? We would still be a tribe in the Middle Eastern desert. That's what we'd be. Purifications come through pain and sacrifice. Sacrifices are, by their very nature, painful. The loss of good people is painful. And it's a true sacrifice. But is our covenant with Adonai one of enduring sacrifice? Is that what we're expected to do? Yes. I think that's what we're expected to do, because our contracts with Him don't limit the way in which He can fulfill them. We can't limit Him. Our struggle in dealing with how we perceive our treatment by God is in making it personal. While God had covenants with Abraham, Moses, and David, those covenants were with the people. They weren't with select individuals there. We failed, and we still fail as a people to abide by the terms of the covenant. God has not failed us, because through the fullness of time, He has held up His part of the bargain. Didn't He provide for the nation of Israel that was foretold? Didn't He deliver the Jews from bondage repeatedly? Didn't He provide the Messiah Yeshua? Haven't many of the prophecies been fulfilled? And aren't there still prophecies to be fulfilled? I said before that the earlier covenants were with mankind, Israel, and the Jews, and that brings us to the new covenant. And that's a personal one that we undertake as individuals. It's promised to us all. And the foundation for this is actually found in Jeremiah. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant, or a renewed covenant, with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declared the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. From the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. I learned in law school that the elements of a contract are offer, acceptance, and consideration. And either party can make an offer. You can walk onto a car lot down the road and say, hey, I want to buy that car. And the guy from the car lot says, okay, let's make a deal. Or you can walk onto the car lot and the salesman's going to come up to you and say, what have I got to do to put you in a new car today? So the offer can be extended from either side. But it doesn't work that way with God. God initiates those. Abraham didn't get the ball rolling with his covenant. Noah didn't get the ball rolling with his covenant. Neither did Moses. They were all approached by God. God approached them. God made the offer. God's covenant is a calling. It's His appeal to those who would be messianic. We answer that call when we choose, when we make choices. And it's all about choices we make. When we choose to say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. We've been learning in Torah study the writings of Kephan as words of encouragement to the Messianic community. And he tells them that days of great persecution are coming and that they must welcome the coming tests of faith. I think of those tests when I think of a saying that was found written in the wall of a concentration camp. And it says, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when I cannot feel it. And I believe in God even when he is silent. So what's the meaning of suffering if we're the chosen people? What was the meaning of the Holocaust? Was the purpose of the Holocaust, was the slaughter of 6 million Jews the effort of Satan to kill belief in Adonai, to wipe out God's people and kill the faith? Is that possible? Certainly it's possible. So that even those who survive would say, these are not his chosen people. They can't be. There was something written on the buckles of the belts that the German soldiers wore when they were herding the Jews in and out of the ovens and when they got them off the trains. And that saying on their belt buckles is Gott mit uns, which means God is with us. Imagine being an observant Jew who sees that written on the belt buckles of the oppressors as they're herding you off of the cattle cars. Imagine the test of your faith when those people who are clearly in charge are telling you what to do. But was the purpose of this in order to prove to the world that the faith cannot be killed? It cannot be killed. That the promises of Adonai are being fulfilled in his time and not ours. We watch the news and ask, where does all this evil come from? And it's easy to lament the state the world is in. It's much, much harder to open your eyes and look around you and appreciate all that God does and how he is at work and how he is present. How does the trial turn out? I'm not going to tell you. But I will tell you that as the guards are leading the selected ones to go out into the gas chamber and taking the selected ones out, all of them read Psalm 90, a prayer of Moshe, the man of God. Adonai, you have been our dwelling place in every generation, before the mountains were born, before you had formed the earth and the world. From eternity past to eternity future, you are God. You bring frail mortals to the point of being crushed, then say, people repent. For from your viewpoint, 1,000 years are merely like yesterday or a night watch. When you sweep them away, they become like sleep. By morning they are like growing grass, growing and flowering in the morning, but by evening cut down and dried up. For we are destroyed by your anger, overwhelmed by your wrath. You have placed our faults before you, our secret sins in the full light of your presence. All our days ebb away under your wrath. Our years die away like a sigh. The span of our life is 70 years. Or if we are strong, 80. Yet at best it is toil and sorrow, over in a moment, and then we are gone. Who grasps the power of your anger and wrath to the degree that the fear due you should inspire? So teach us to count our days, so that we will become wise. Return, Adonai. How long must it go on? Take pity on your servants. Fill us at daybreak with your love, so that we can sing for joy as long as we live. Let our joy last as long as the time you made us suffer, for as many years as we experience trouble. Show your deeds to your servants, and your glory to their children. May the favor of Adonai our God be on us. Prosper for us all the work that we do. Yes, prosper the work that we do. And this is what they were saying, what they were reciting as they marched into the gas chamber. That speaks volumes of the strength of a faith. One of the most remarkable books in the Bible is that of Job. I think Job was put in there to show how much you can endure. If you remember, Job had everything going for him and lost everything. And friends of his spent a long time trying to talk to him about how to deal with it. And it finally took God, Adonai, speaking to Job to give him some perspective. He says, "Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth from the womb? Have you commanded the morning or caused the dawn to know its place? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Can you hunt the prey for the lion? Do you know how the mountain goats bring forth? Do you give the horse its might?" And Job's response was he was speechless. He couldn't say any more. In Eli Wiesel's book and the commentary following it, there's some phrases in here that I think we should bear in mind. Remember that God exists and God resists to the extent that humans do both in the name of God. When we call on the name of God, He is there. When we act according to what He wants, He is there. When we turn away from Him, when we deny Him, when we sin, He can't look upon that. God is waiting impatiently for us humans to start playing our proper role in creation and redemption. Every one of these covenants built upon the previous one. If we had simply followed the rules in the Garden of Eden, there would be no need for a second covenant. But we didn't. If we had simply done what was expected of us with the covenant with Noah or the covenant with Abraham or the covenant with Moses, there would be no need for another covenant. But we keep getting it wrong. We keep getting it wrong. And sometimes when bad things happen to those who don't deserve it, sometimes that's just taking one for the team. God has not abandoned us. He builds one covenant upon the other, upon the one before it, hoping that eventually we will come to our senses and honor our part of the bargain.